this is the 8th part of my notice to the Universal Postal Union to remind them of their authority and all the grounds we have for actually abolishing government, military, the banks, the courts, and to correct our jurisdiction, living men and women above all corporations. So we're making the case to abolish the military and governments and support our communications in forming new courts. We still need the communication of the post offices. I'm making the case that the formation of the post office before the formation of the government's operations plays an important role in the universal legal technology currently as we seek remedy. Government's later bankruptcies have had no legal effect upon the solvent post office to this day. The post office is still solvent and operational, ready to fulfil its duty to help the people in their communications, to set a new government now that a complete breakdown of the existing governmental structures is required. Now, that's important, government's later bankruptcies, because also in the formation of the Universal Postal Union, it describes that any person, and that person can be an individual or a whole country, once they're bankrupt, they become registered basically as incompetent, and matters can be taken out of their hands. So this is another opportunity. Everyone's bankrupt, so they have been proven that they are not capable of running a country. So that's interesting. Everything is commerce, and all commerce is contract. Even the military were unlawfully and illegally converted by fraud into mercenary forces, and all the conflicts in the world are illegal and undeclared mercenary conflicts. Since then, there have been occupying countries claiming that their lawful governments simply disappeared and have left them as custodians and caretakers of our assets. There is no evidence, no contract, and no valid authority to do this. Police have been used as cheap mercenaries, and they have been directed by foreign interests to engage in criminal activities, not only against their own people, but against people in friendly allied nations around the world. We the people had nearly forgotten the significance of postage stamps. Most letters received by post are red meter stamped. In fact, officials send things out by cancel stamp are a rarity, maybe only 2%. Using 2 witnesses and combined with the postage stamps have given me a priority mechanism. But even use of these stamps in this manner has got the attention of those in the system, to whom I provided the paperwork. Now, the paperwork I'm referring to is the appeal that was lodged, the charges against the World Economic Forum, the United Nations and the World Health Organization, and a few dodgy characters in other countries as well. So what feels powerful in this instance is that it made me the master of that post office. I will let you, Masahiko, as the recipient, deal with the significance of this, but please make it a timely, positive and responsible settlement of the very serious matters I've brought to your attention. The rationale for using the 2-cent stamps in America was that in the 19th century, the official postage rate for the de jure post office of the United States of America was fixed at 2 cents, from where the expression "add your 2 cents worth" came. Think of this as taking part in a public consultation where the UPU's respect for the opinions of mankind is necessitated by the postage stamp instrument being used. It was ingenious, since communication was a higher value than government itself. Communication has a higher value than government itself because if governments fail, the people still have a need to communicate with one another to form a new government. Or not, as we the people are thinking we've had enough of government, mind control. At this juncture, we need the Universal Postal Service for communication, and we want to get rid of the military and corrupt governments. The UPU can order this on any number of pretexts, but the first non-accusatory pretext is that they are bankrupt and therefore proven incompetent and should not be left to manage their affairs any longer. Secondly, there is substantial evidence that the governments, international organisations and the military are annihilating the human race and intend to. Thirdly, these corporate institutions and successfully thieving individuals are planning to claim ownership of ecosystems and monetize natural processes instead of returning even the original assets as ordered by the courts. One such family legacy for which the paperwork is done is worth a figure represented by the number 2 followed by 40 zeros. It is agreed that 1% will stay with the heir and within the family, and 99% will be used for the uplifting of humanity. The judge and fiduciary can help the UPU structure your instructions to dismantle the military and many corporate institutions safely, as well as empower the unincorporated people. There are many men and women more knowledgeable than I who can explain the progression of the crimes in order to prosecute. Our unincorporated states did all the delegating powers and remain the holding companies for all mutual powers. That might take a little bit of sinking in. Our unincorporated states did all the delegating of powers and remain the holding companies for all mutual powers. So banks over time and lacking authority to issue currency on behalf of our countries have seized and run up unauthorised credit using fractional reserve on the basis of borrowed and stolen original assets, and worse, the trade of our souls. We really need you, Masahiko, to publicly admit that the fraud has been perpetuated and facilitated in part by the UPU, delivering all those wrongly addressed and malicious letters and submitting to the use of Roman civil procedure. Coming back out of this circumstance requires honouring the credit owed to the living people. We are creating an entirely new banking system, enabled to directly connect with people worldwide. And we would really love and appreciate the use of the post office network. It was always supposed to provide a public community banking system where savings were backed by state assets. The people are ready to make this work with a new golden peg and criteria for access to credit. A few years ago, it was my idea to make water the golden peg for Ireland's public banks, using the National Biodiversity Data Centre to formalise a lending criteria based on operational and financial due diligence. I foresaw that people could draw down European Green Deal funding on the basis of conservation and low-impact projects. Within 2 weeks of my posting the proposal to the Finance Minister, Pascal Donohoe, and Minister Leo Varadkar, they met the central bank in secret and returned, having sold Ireland's water resource for a pittance of 8 billion, and it was not theirs to sell. Some financial parts to the remedy that the UPU can command: an international gold asset-backed dollar, pound, yen, punt, rupiah, zloty, and all of equal intrinsic value; the release of the uncut Kennedy silver-backed paper certificate currency; the reissuance of silver dollar coinage, and the release of prepaid credit certificates. The new banking system does not back, underwrite, approve, nor consent to the issuance of central bank digital currencies, as they are even more ephemeral and subject to political and practical manipulation than the fiat money they have been creating and we have been using so far. CBDC, that's the central bank digital currency, would lead to total loss of trust in government, rioting, starvation, disease, and other evils that we can do without. The actual American government has instructed the government of the Philippines, as the actual donors and depositors of all trust and account interests, and has instructed the bank for international settlements concerning the actual ownership interests and actual fiduciary responsibilities related to our gold and silver, which is actually underwriting all 63 central banks, the World Bank and the Federal Reserve. For thousands of years, mankind has struggled through untold suffering, through labour, wars, slavery, exploitation, interest, debt credit, and economic abuse. The actual owners, we the living people, have established the bilateral prosperity system, formerly known as the bilateral banking system, for all nations and all people for their immediate relief, health and happiness, and restoration after all this criminal activity by the banks and all the military organisations. The Universal Postal Union have to grasp the detail of the senses in which people have been commercialised and trapped in the wrong jurisdiction. I believe you might find this understanding of the Kescovy trusts useful, and I believe there are two other trusts relevant to how the admiralty commercial jurisdiction has so flourished to the detriment of the people. Old birth, as in two-berth cabin, certificates had, in very small print across the front face at the very edge of the page, for example, American Banknote Company. The majority of people still need to be informed about why national banknote companies were involved with the printing of birth certificates. It is the subject of our true jurisdiction, which has never been taught in our public schools or universities, along with any real education about debt, mortgages, how banks create money out of nothing and ravage the world for it. Will the Universal Postal Union be the authority to communicate the basic premise that all citizens and possibly all residents of a country have been birthed at birth, are issued a birth certificate which is mandatory to obtain on penalty of a large fine or imprisonment, a certificate which registers the birth and, according to Black's Law Dictionary, transfers ownership of the physical property, the child, from its parents as A, witness and B, informer, to the state. Will the Universal Postal Union please explain in their Simple Truths series how, in commercial law, birth certificates act as de facto warehouse receipts, which receipts are then sold on the international bond markets as consideration, because the Western countries are all bankrupt and have been so for decades. Their populations have been sold as chattel to the international banksters and the ultra-wealthy of the world, such as the Rockefellers and Rothschilds. Once you hold a birth certificate, even though it was registered not by you but by your parents, and presented as identification for obtaining loans or for other government-approved purposes, such as joining the military or getting hired and agreeing to pay taxes, as far as I'm aware, there is always on it the dreaded all-capital letters name, which was assigned you by the state government. Would the UPU please issue an apology for always and only delivering post using this corporate name? All other government-approved identification documents use the same corporate name, which implies that we are effectively agreeing to be the chattel that we were constructively admitted to be when our parents ignorantly transferred us over to the state as chattel, sold for future payment of the tax debt created by the Reserve Bank that operates privately and for profit and owned by the wealthy but undocumented elites in every country of the world. That is the basic premise. If there is truth to this supposition, it would mean that our corporate name, which is reasonably the only name, nom de plume, which can be used by a government or a private corporation to contract with, is actually the vehicle used to process all financial transactions of any sort, i.e. to enact the activity of commerce. This is since all corporations are dead and only living beings which can form a signature or make some sort of mark to identify themselves as not being corporations. So, corporations can't transact with living men and women, and vice versa. Would the Universal Postal Union circulate all this information so that the people can unite and form their new parliaments, like they are doing in Ireland, Indonesia, Africa, the Kingdom of Hawaii, and America too? In effect, anything that requires a fee, a payment, a tax receipt, an invoice, etc., from the smallest financial transaction to the largest, comes under the Uniform Commercial Code or other codes or statutes in other countries, must be transacted via the corporate name. This all capital letters name on your driving licence, mortgage, bank statements, credit card statements, all bills and almost any letter, such as lawyers' letters, etc., and if not transacted under that specific name, are null and void in law and cannot be enforced. This would also explain to the people why all courts are actually commercial courts of the incorporated governments or crown. Time is of the essence, as the World Economic Forum trained young leaders are in position in every government introducing a multitude of legislation that violates the right of the people. We are now in the 4th year of the worldwide distribution of a novel experimental gene therapy distributed to more than half of the world's population. The latest World Economic Plan is to criminalise the men and women on all sorts of pretexts, like online harms or hate speech and crimes against humanity, within which they identify defining oneself as a biological man or woman as a crime against humanity. This means if you, Masahiko, the Director General of the Universal Postal Union, leave the corporate institutions in place, men and women can be convicted and further muzzled rather than be facilitated in standing assemblies of jural, militia and other lawful assemblies to replace the police and the mercenary system they have been enforcing. Now I have abandoned the nom de plume and want to refuse to transact under that name and refuse to carry government-approved identification, I have become in effect unrecognisable in law, and many like me have been harassed, arrested or jailed until we consented to use the approved form of legal, but not lawful, personal identifying information to make any and all approved financial contracts. You must be starting to see the corner humanity has been backed into. But we only need a good communication network and the authority of the UPU to inform the local, national and international policing bodies that they do not have jurisdiction over us. Can the Universal Postal Union supply alternative paperwork to re-establish the land and soil jurisdiction and the true nature of our assembly on that jurisdiction, please? Would the Universal Postal Union be kind enough to distribute alternative documentation that declares our right to travel and how our legal names are now understood to be held in a private trust so that we can establish our power of attorney over our own affairs in all jurisdictions and secure our assets? This would really help during the transition for the UPU to renounce the birth certificate fraud and its fraudulent all capital letters name foisted on us by our duped parents and perpetuated inadvertently by the Postal Service would be a massive legacy for you, Masahiko. You would have ensured that our children can live a life of freedom from any and all such transgressions against their souls. I am sure you agree that we were designed to be free agents with full rights by our Creator and certainly not to be micromanaged by corporations. Let us work together with the UPU to throw off the chains of tyranny which have succeeded in ensnaring us with, often for many decades and certainly without our consent. Diplomatic jurisdiction and immunity from liability in a commercial jurisdiction. Immunity from legal process of every kind in respect of words spoken or written and all acts done by them. Imagine that. Someone in charge with immunity from legal process of every kind in respect of words spoken or written and all acts done by them in their capacity as representatives. So we know that representatives include advisors, technical experts, secretaries of delegations and representatives at congresses, on the executive and liaison commission, at administrative congresses and on commissions of the union. We know that they shall enjoy immunity from personal arrest or detention and from seizure of their personal baggage and the inviolability for all papers and documents. But who has vetted this very vast extension of diplomatic immunity? It seems to have become a custom now, as soon as an international organisation is formed, to seek to get attached to some parent body like the United Nations, and immediately afterwards, as a matter of status, to come along and ask for all kinds of diplomatic privileges and immunities. It may well be we shall find there is an order for the International Bar Association or for the International Federation of Trade Unions. I'm sure there already is. We the people would be grateful if you would publicise this progression that has led to criminal misconduct in public office being a matter that is not accountable in law. It may help to explain that originally privilege was a matter of status, and even then many argued that where no cause was made out for exempting persons from the operations of the law, it is better to let the law apply.